The US comes into this as more than just a cheerleader, therefore. Araghchi's accusation is that Washington is the enabling environment that lets this expansionist project become real. There's nothing speculative about the US military integration with Israel. Congress's own briefings detail the war reserve stockpile for allies in Israel, which is a deep pool of American munitions stored on Israeli soil. US and Israeli intelligence chiefs issue public readouts of close cooperation meetings, and US carrier groups and bases ring the region with surveillance and strike capacity. On the diplomatic side, veto after veto at the UN Security Council has shielded Israel from even mild censure over Gaza, West Bank settlements and cross-border operations, including a US veto on a ceasefire resolution when the death toll in Gaza was already catastrophic. When you put all those pieces together, the idea of the US ushering in Greater Israel stops being about Washington drawing maps in a back room and starts being about something more structural, a reality where Israel can widen its control, escalate its strikes, and entrench its occupation with the confidence that the world's dominant power will keep the weapons flowing, the intelligence shared, and the legal consequences blocked. Whether officials in Washington wake up thinking about the Nile and the Euphrates is almost besides the point if they are building a security umbrella big enough for the people who do think that way to act under it. Iran's foreign minister has tried to wrap all of this into a larger story about how the global system now works, which is where his language about militarization and democratic norms comes in. At the conference his ministry hosted under the title International Law Under Assault, Aggression and Defense, Araghchi framed recent events in West Asia as a mirror reflecting what he called the arrogant policies of the US and the Zionist entity. He said that he talked in Washington about rules-based order is just branding for a hegemony through strength doctrine that has played out in ruined states and shattered societies from Iraq to Gaza, and that the same doctrine is now being applied to Iran under the cover of counter-proliferation and security. When he says the world is moving towards militarization, he's not simply noting that defense budgets are up. He's arguing that decisions that used to run through the UN, through treaties, through at least some shared legal language, are now being taken through airstrikes, sanctions packages and security pacts instead, with law invoked only after the fact to justify what has already been done. He casts Iran as the opposite pole in that story, insisting that Tehran has acted within international law when it responds to attacks, that it views the security of neighbouring states as tied to its own, and that if Iran had not stood firm against repeated violations of its sovereignty, the region's future would have been even bleaker. The question then is whether the specific charge that the US is ushering in Greater Israel stands up when you take it apart. Because it's easy to caricature, but it's also easy to see why it lands with a lot of people who have been watching this long term. Start with the basic components. Is Israel expanding its control over Palestinian land in a way that fits even the narrower version of Greater Israel? Well, the answer there is really not contested, is it? Settlement numbers keep climbing, legal changes inside Israel keep moving towards annexation of parts of the West Bank, and Gaza has been put through waves of destruction and depopulation that line up grimly with long-standing fantasies about solving the Gaza problem by removing Palestinians from the Strip. Place the US green zone and red zone plans that will partition Gaza between undeveloped wreckage where Palestinians are to be sent and redeveloped space under Israeli control, and this worldview is simply reinforced yet again. Is Israel projecting force beyond its recognised borders into multiple neighbouring states? Again, the evidence is there in the record of strikes into Syria, Lebanon, Iraq and Iran. Is the US enabling that behaviour rather than restraining it? It's hard to argue otherwise when you look at weapons transfers, intelligence cooperation and the pattern of UN vetoes. And our senior Israeli figures talking about Greater Israel in positive terms rather than treating it as a dangerous and extremist idea. In Netanyahu's case, the Prime Minister, the answer is yes. So the factual backbone of Iran's case is solid. There is an expansionist ideology with roots in Greater Israel discourse. There is expansion on the ground, and there is a superpower smoothing the path. Where things move from fact into interpretation is in the claim that this amounts to a conscious US project to redraw the region in line with the Greater Israel map. Washington still tells the world it supports a two-state solution. It maintains peace treaties with Jordan and Egypt that would be blown apart by any declared annexation of their land. And it has to worry about the reaction of Gulf monarchies if Israel's reach becomes too obviously imperial. It's one thing to provide cover for settlement growth and operations in the occupied territories, quite another to openly sign off on wiping away other states' borders. There's no evidence of a formal US policy document that says we are going to deliver Greater Israel. What there is instead is a pattern of incentives and protections that make it easier for the most expansionist elements in Israel to act and harder for anyone else to stop them.